Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Cloud and Medical Device Cybersecurity, the FDA's 2023 Guidelines. My name is Samaya and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll attend to them during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, you can contact me at any time by sending me a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please also note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. So now, without further ado, I'd like to pass control to our speakers. So John, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
There we go. Hey, hi everybody. First of all, thank you very much for joining in. Just as a quick introduction, my name is John Miller. I'm BioT's Vice President of the Americas, and I have the pleasure of sort of facilitating this discussion that we're having today. Actually, this is the second in a series of thought leadership webinars that we've been trying to do, that we bring together not only BioT, but a number of our trusted partners and ones that have expertise in a particular area. Last topic we tackled was around cloud change control. And this one today is about just as an interesting one that affects both the industry or participate in, the domains in which we come from, et cetera. And our whole goal is to try to simplify the complex and multidisciplinary topics that hit cloud-powered medical devices. Today's session, all around the 2023 FDA guidance on cybersecurity. The interesting thing is we'll come at this topic from a variety of topics because everything that's affected within this not only affects IT, but also product, regulatory, post-market surveillance, and more. So we hope to hit it from all those different angles. So the aspect that's going to guide our conversation is everything that was published in the most recent version of those guidelines. And what we're going to do during the webinar is try to untangle these to give you very, very much operational guidance or direction in terms of what's different, how it changes the way you go about things, or candidly, how some things stay very, very much the same. So the agenda that we'll do is, first of all, we'll ground up and say what's changed, because I think it's good just getting everybody on the same page. And then what we'll do is we'll come across our panel by working through varying topics that we think stimulate the discussion around the broad aspect of the scenario. Plus, we'll have some time to kind of field questions from the audience, and if you stay to the end, we've got some unique and compelling takeaways that we'd like to share with you for attending the session. So in order to do that, the good thing is we've brought together a panel of people that come from varying disciplines. Now in the invitation and in the website, we gave you perspectives on their backgrounds, and they'll interject that during the flow of their discussion. The interesting thing is, if you look into that, is the teams not only bring a particular subject matter expertise relative to tackling this topic, but also come from industry, your industry. So what's nice is that they're approaching the topic from an area that they sit in today, but many of these people sat in your chair previously. So they're looking at the problem both from a particular angle of themselves, but very, very much know what you'll do. So we'll get into that as we go. We'll go around the group to have it flow. Please feel free during the course of it to ask questions, and we'll come back to it at the end. So that's really what we're going to try to do today and how we're going to do it. So let's start. So maybe the first things first is what happened, how did we get here, what are the aspects related to the 2023 guidelines. Alan, do you want to kind of kick in with some framework?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, John. Let me thank BioT. Let me thank Daniel and Flair, who invited me, and it's nice to be on with Alex. So thanks, John, for giving me a couple minutes. We've got about, I think we're going to try to do about 4 or 5 minutes, high level, and I'm going to assume that if you've signed up, you know what cybersecurity is and you know how to spell FDA. So I'm not going to get into all of that, but my background is that I advise clients, medical device, pharmaceutical companies with the FDA. So I'm coming from it from a regulatory lawyer's perspective. I help companies with the FDA. Alex and I do some things same and differently. But how did we get here? So cybersecurity in and of itself is not really a new concept. One of my partners who heads up our cybersecurity group said, listen, it's been around forever. But I think what we're seeing is that as technology changes, particularly in the FDA medical device space and AI, there's much more concern, and we've seen it with more FDA guidances. Of course, we saw, that there was the statute itself, which Congress required FDA to look more into this. And I think what's happening is that as more AI cybersecurity technology is emerging, and as devices themselves are becoming more interconnected, the fear of cybersecurity, whether in the hospital space or products that come in contact with the patient, there's more concern that this could affect safety issues and that there could be all kinds of severe and clinical negative impact. And so FDA issued, of course, has issued guidance, and of course we had the statute itself, the part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 23, and I think Alex may say a little bit more about that. But the concern is, again, medical device safety, of course, effectiveness, and the idea that there could be cyber threats. FDA is asking more questions. So whether or not your device is actually cybersecurity or AI focused, or whether or not there's a concern that there could be a cybersecurity threat that could have therefore have some clinical effect, that's what is concerning both Congress and, of course, FDA. And by the way, just FYI, while this is focused on medical devices, FDA has touched on the issue with drug development. So I don't know if we have any companies that may be doing combination products, but you should also be aware of that. So that's extremely high level, probably 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet. But let me turn it over, if I can, with John's permission, to Alex, who comes at it from a similar but maybe slightly nuanced perspective.
Hi, so my name's Alex Smith. I'm an engineer. I work for Hogan Lovells. So I review and edit about 510K per day. I've been here for about 7 years. Prior to this, I was software engineer at Human Genome Sciences and GlaxoSmithKline for about 15 years. So just to give you a quick background, on December 29, 2022, the Consolidated Appropriation Act was signed into law. If you can go to the next slide, John, if that's all right. So this Appropriation Act gave FDA the statutory authority to request several different cybersecurity related things as part of medical device submissions. This includes a plan to monitor cybersecurity vulnerabilities and exploits. So generally that's a cybersecurity plan. They want you to have processes and procedures to provide a reasonable assurance that the device and the related systems are cyber secure. And from our interpretation, FDA wants you to understand the end-to-end implementation of your device. So that's including if it's in a hospital network or whatnot. And the third thing is the software bill of materials, which you've all heard about. This includes like off-the-shelf software, open source software, things like that, libraries, drivers. In the past, it used to be just high-level things like Windows 10 or Windows 11 or Linux operating systems. But now FDA really wants to understand all the libraries and drivers that you're using in the system. Next slide, please, John. FDA guidances interpret FDA's policies and regulatory expectations. Most of you know that the final pre-market guidance that FDA was adhering to was in 2014, which you see here on the right. In 2018, there was another draft that came out. In 2022, I believe it was, there was another draft that came out. And recently, in 2023, the final guidance came out interpreting the most recent act. And if we can move forward then, just a little bit of background.
Yeah, so with that, let's dig in a little bit further into that. So, I mean, in a lot's changed, and in some regards, there probably are what are the key things to think about. So maybe Flair, if you could come and introduce yourself to the group, give a little bit of your background because it's unique in terms of what you bring to the question. But what are the device-related items that people need to think about in these new guidelines?
Thank you, John. So my background is being an engineer for decades in the medical device space for 25 years in the startup nation here in Israel. And actually, what happens today is the desire of manufacturers to become, to make all their device connected. It started even before COVID, but it grew during the COVID and digital health and so on. And we can say safely that now most of the devices are connected or either want to be connected in the near future. So things as Ellen and Alex mentioned earlier was change in the basic fundamental things of thinking of the FDA. They now see cyber threats like equal to patient safety. And this understanding that today the device is the weakest link of the entire secure atmosphere of a manufacturer is very problematic because the networking is safe or supposed to be, your laptop is safe, your cloud, you can buy BioT and be safe, but the device is still exposed, right? So this is the weakest link. And as the responsibility goes to the manufacturers, but the understanding of how to do that remains the same. So there is a gap, and we are trying like to close the gap with tools. So our conversation as Sternum, cybersecurity company dedicated for medical device, it was pretty changed in the last 3 years. I can manufacturers asking me a simple question: how can I actively protect my devices after I release them to the field and have no connection with them? So if I need to divide the three main buckets of the FDA new requirement, I will divide them to design, development, and post-market. In design, the wish is to reduce the number of vulnerability and their severity, when the thought after that is actually to reduce their exploitability during the post-market, and hence to reduce the risk to the patient safety connection. During the development, connected device has highly dependency on third-party library. And actually, the FDA asks us as manufacturer to treat those library as it's your own code. You need to make sure that there is no cyber risk in those areas. And in the post-market, as Alex mentioned, you need to have like a plan, how to identify, how to communicate, how to manage vulnerability after you're releasing the product. And of course, the plan of cybersecurity. So all of that actually, hopefully, will make the device from the weakest link in the chain to the strongest one. So
Great.
That's happening.
Yeah, because in some regards, you automatically start to think of the cloud, but the device is a very critical part of that scenario. That makes sense. So Daniel, maybe you can jump in because you're looking at the other part of the system architecture in terms of how to address this issue of what's new.
So actually, when you look at it from the cloud side and from the FDA guidance, there are no specific requirements regarding the cloud. They're talking about software in general, and cloud is being treated as software in a medical device or a part of medical device, same way that the medical device itself is being treated. So on top of what Blair just mentioned, on the cloud side, there is an expectation to handle things which are more related to the workflows, which are part of the data workflows and the patient-related workflows, and things around the authenticity of data and devices and the integrity of it, authorization workflows, and how those are being done in the system once you're using a connected device. Things around availability, how you make sure that the device is always available and the data is always available. and then confidentiality, protection of the data itself, how you protect sensitive data in the cloud. So once you're doing all the planning, you need to explain how exactly you are going to do that, either on the device side or on the cloud side or on the system level, depends on what you are building. And once you're moving to the next step of or the ongoing phase, both in the development but also in the production, so how you make sure that the things are staying up to date and secure. That's also something that the cloud side needs to address. And the last point that is not less important, it's very easy to secure everything just by blocking everything. You can close all the ports, close all the entrances, and be very secure. But eventually, the FDA also explicitly talks about it. It should all reside while still having an open system. So how you make sure that your system can drive data to other third-party systems like EHR, CRMs, quality management systems in a secured manner, and making sure that the system is still open to interact with the other parties. So that's on the cloud side.
Yeah, so it's not only just the end-to-end element relative to the architecture of the device platform itself, it's the ecosystem in which it lives in. It's the idea of the caregiver, the patient, et cetera. So it's a broad topic. Okay,
Correct.
so maybe one more thing before we kind of put a little a bow on the issue of just the guidance and the key things. So, Alan, how about from just like there's a lot in the document. How about just from like the regulatory side? Like, what are some of the key takeaways or things companies need to consider?
Thanks. Yeah, there is a lot. And so I try to, LinkedIn told me apparently I've been practicing on my phone for 27 years. They just got a little notice, and I've been doing it for another 4. So everybody thinks that they're new, okay? And in this case, cybersecurity, but 15, 20 years ago was nanotechnology. And I think what we always have to remember is at the end of the day, FDA has certain concerns about safety and efficacy. And what do they really want to know? They want to know that you know your product inside and out. And I also refer sometimes to clients as the beautiful baby syndrome. Now, I have 2 kids. They're now grown, and I love my kids, and I know this is probably recorded, but they're not perfect, okay? My wife thinks that they are, good Jewish mother, but I don't criticize anybody. Okay, so I say know the weaknesses, know the holes. So if I know that my kids are not perfect, I can be a better father, be a better husband, etc. Similarly, your product is not going to be perfect. This isn't in essence, it's a pass-fail exam. When I was taking the bar exam 30-some years ago. So know the weaknesses. So what the guidance documents are trying to basically say is, listen, here's our concerns from an FDA perspective. The risk, you do a risk assessment, interoperability, I can't even say the word, all the things that you would need in the application, but also know the weaknesses, know where you have some gaps, and therefore fill the gaps. Know where you're strong, but also know where you may have some gaps, and that's where you have Flair and Daniel and those kinds of things. So the more you know your product, and the more you show confidently that you've anticipated the FDA's concerns about cyber attacks and where there's problems and inefficiencies, et cetera. If you can show FDA, hey, I got a good handle on this, and even maybe proactively, while you wouldn't say to FDA, here's where I know there are gaps, you might say, and we've also anticipated worst case scenarios, the what if scenarios. And I think if you can keep that in mind, even though it's innovative, that's the key. Because if you can always come back to that FDA is not really shifting, they appreciate the innovation, but at the end of the day, they're a public health organization. Yeah. So FDA is trying to find a balance of, we know that cybersecurity, we know AI, we know all of these wonderful developments, like we need nanotechnology. But at the end of the day, the product has to be safe and effective going in, but also post-market, have you ensured that it's still going to be a safe and effective, in this case more safe, because of the threats that may exist. So those are, I guess, some of the takeaways from the guidance, but also I might say maybe some of my takeaways, if you will, big picture.
Yeah, and I think, to some, if FDA is doing the right thing, it's a context to work within, and you need to understand that, but you need to just be able to articulate it, and that sort of does a nice fold into our next topic, which is, there's no such thing in a medical device without a whole bunch of documentation, right? So there's a reality that, there's been changes around this that are in addition to all of the rigorous requirements associated around validation and verification. So it might be worthwhile kind of double clicking down a little bit into some of the changes and then some of the topics that are with it. So, Alex, maybe let me shift back to you. What can you talk a little bit about the changes, the new requirements, the eStar program and flow? So I think we might have some slides also that'll help in the discussion. So feel free to frame it and cue it up.
So one of the great things that FDA has done this year is they now allow you to, or mandate that you provide your submission for 510Ks, de novos, and IDEs, and deficiency letter responses through the eStar PDF, which we will walk through in a second. The first draft of the eStar came out just before October when it was mandated. Some of the things that FDA requested in that first draft was a cybersecurity plan and a cybersecurity risk assessment. That led a lot of leeway for companies and how they were submitting all these documents and interpreting the recent FDA guidance. In December 2023, FDA put out the new version 5, which will be mandated in February. We've already started using it, and it really outlines exactly the attachments that you have to provide for not only software, but for cybersecurity. Now, through all the eStar revisions, the overall software documentation expectations really haven't changed with guidance. That's the documentation level evaluation, software description, risk management file, SRS, software architecture design charts, SDS, lifecycle, test B&B testing, revision history, and unresolved anomalies. But what has changed is the cybersecurity information, and maybe we can push forward to that. John, to the next slide, if that's right. So what we're showing here on the left is what the eStar actually looks like. You can see they have an attachment for each document that they expect to see per the new guidance. There's drop-down boxes where they want a little bit more information about specific page numbers and threat methodologies and things like that. But overall, I found this to be very helpful as it kind of refines about what the documentation looks like. One of the things that you should expect, though, is deficiencies to come out of left field. I mean, it's not unheard of. For example, in the past month, I've seen FDA ask how your device handles quantum cryptography. That's not in the guidance, but it's something that some FDA reviewers are, thinking about. So don't be surprised if you see some left field questions. Most of the internet relies on TLS 1.2. We've seen some reviewers demand TLS 1.3. We've seen some reviewers say AES 128 isn't sufficient, even though it's pretty much an industry standard. So don't be surprised if you see these type of questions that are outside of the eStar. But just quickly, we'll go through the eStar. It's asking for a risk management report. 95% of our clients are using STRIDE threat methodology. Microsoft has a nice tool on their website. A lot of my clients in Israel prefer the OS Dragon tool. They say they find that easier to use. And you can build these threat models in like an hour using YouTube videos. I mean, you can pull them together pretty quickly at a high level. They want architecture views, which is kind of part of your threat model. They want to understand the trust boundary around your device and its relation to, say, the hospital environment. They want the SBOM. There's numerous tools out there, open source. Provides very high-level methodology. There's a lot of paid ways that you can do it out there that maybe provide a bit more detail, but just do what works for you. Maybe we can go to the next slide. They want an assessment of unresolved anomalies. Most of you know that you have to provide those as part of your software documentation, but now FDA wants to understand how your unresolved anomalies relate to cybersecurity specifically. So when you scan your SBOM for vulnerabilities, what are you seeing low, medium, high, or critical vulnerabilities, and how are you addressing those? One of the new big things for this eStar version 5 is the cybersecurity metrics. They want to know what kind of events are occurring internally. Cybersecurity controls. It's very important that you look at Appendix 1 of the 2023 cybersecurity guidance and try to mirror FDA's language in that Appendix 1. When you get deficiencies for all these things, authentication, authorization, cryptography, they're really asking them directly tied to that Appendix 1. One thing that we noticed starting in January 2023, right after the omnibus was signed, the same 30 boilerplate deficiency questions. Almost every client was getting these across the board. And now if you don't provide those security questions, we're still seeing those boilerplate deficiencies. So make sure you've answered each one of these cybersecurity controls. I think we have two more slides left. They want to understand the architecture views. And personally, I think that's really part of your software architecture document. It's also part of your threat model, so you can refer back to that document. Cybersecurity testing, they want to see penetration testing. You can do it internally or with a third-party vendor. Generally, I see all the third parties just using the OS Top 10, OWASP. That's the best way to do your penetration testing. You can do it, like I said, you can do it internally or externally. They want you to do malformed inputs, vulnerability scanning, and static or dynamic code testing. The next section is cybersecurity labeling. They want to understand exactly what page your labeling is on. It needs to be an independent section within your user manual or labeling. The last thing is the cybersecurity plan. They want to understand how you're going to do risk assessment. Most companies do an initial stride risk assessment or an attack tree. And then secondly, you should do a CVSS assessment of any vulnerabilities that you discover. So it should really be two parts. First, a threat model assessment, risk assessment, then a CVSS assessment. Okay, so the last thing is interoperability. They just want to understand how many interfaces you have in the device. That's really just a drop down. And let's see, then the last slide. I think that's it. Maybe we can push forward.
Yeah, so I think let's stay on this topic just for a little bit and look at it from a couple of different angles. So Daniel, from a cloud perspective, to contribute to accelerate this process and help kind of a better chance of first pass success, what are some of the things relative to the deliverables from the cloud point of view, and some of the things we do, some of the things we help our clients do, but more importantly, need to be done?
Of course, the SBOM itself to generate all the normally when you're using the cloud, you're using a lot of third-party components and tools, and building the SBOM in a readable machine format that can be shared and be used as part of the overall submission is quite critical. So doing it on the cloud side is also required. It's around providing and Alex mentioned that the security architecture flows. So what kind of components you're using, how data flows from each component to each component, how it is being secured. All of those should be also provided as part of the submission. And regarding the penetration test, so it should of course be done also on the cloud side itself, not only on the device. What we see is that there are, as Alex said, there are many tools which you can use and do your tests internally. You don't necessarily need to use a third-party pen test company to work with you, which can save you significant costs. And those are also being deployed very easily into the overall CI/CD process, into the cloud process. So it can be very straightforward and efficient.
Okay. Claire, how about it from the other side, from the device point? Anything relative to this process that are key?
Yeah, so if you've asked me these questions, like when I was a VP R&D or even VP regulation, I was just treat this new regulation as a pain in the ass, sorry for the language, and just making sure that I pass all the checks from E star, B star, whatever it will be. I think we need, as a manufacturer, like to gain a different approach, more proactive approach in a way we protect our devices. Penetration test is great, static analysis is great, is helping significantly, but it's not enough. The fact that it's getting in such a late stage of the V&V cycle, it's a little bit too late. We need to do something from the first line of code, and we need to change our thinking, not only to be reactive, but to be proactive with our desire. We need to install solutions that will know how to identify vulnerability in real time and bugs in real time, to know how to investigate them and to fix them quickly. To know regarding the risk of the cybersecurity risk, we need to understand which mitigation will be able to reduce this risk for the cybersecurity in appropriate way, which will be helpful for patient safety, because that's our purpose. Security by design is part of the development cycle, testing of security, mitigation, finding bugs on field. That's very important, and we need to think how can we do it, and maybe to install tools that will help us achieve that. And I think the state of mind regarding the vulnerability is, as long as human beings develop those lines of code, it will have bugs. And if there is bugs, there will be vulnerability, and we will find new vulnerability in each and every stage of the development cycle, and we need to think how to treat them differently in each and every stage. For example, you can implement development processes that account and address the cybersecurity risk and vulnerability. SPDF is a set of processes that help you to reduce it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting because the reality is, in some regards, their work has to be done. The question is, how do you actually tackle that across the team? If you try to avoid it, the work's still there. So the idea is looking at platforms and looking at capabilities to just accelerate the process. The other angle on this, outside of just development, is from a regulatory kind of a liability act side, even as well. Alan, any thoughts there that need to be considered during system design?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I appreciate what Fleur said, and on the drug side, like Dr. Janet Woodcock, who was Center Director, she had talked for years about quality in at the outset, and I think that's sort of the proactive. That is, rather than deal with the recall or the market withdrawal or the adverse event, if you can build in quality to begin with. She was using the automobile analogy. Get the car, get that running, and then hopefully you won't have the flat tire or the bad engine or whatever. If we extrapolate, and I think this is what Fleur was saying, is simply the guidance documents and the types of things that Alex and Daniel talked about. With FDA, you're getting a sense of what their expectations are. So one is, again, the what ifs, but also because some of this technology is so different, there may be an opportunity to educate FDA. When there's new, that's scary, but it also may be an opportunity. A challenge becomes an opportunity. I worked with the Mondale campaign, Walter Mondale, when I was 17, and we had a placard that said there's no challenges, only opportunities. Of course, he lost 49 states, so there was plenty of challenges more than opportunities, but there may be an opportunity to get ahead of it if you talk to FDA. And so then sort of going to your question about, liability, you have a few things. One is you got the FDA issue. I won't call the regulatory, it's not liability as much as you may get additional information. As Alex was saying, you're going to get boilerplate questions. So that obviously leads to delay. The liability is also, adequate directions for use and how to use it and how to minimize it, and the liability considerations of safety issues, or defects, which of course leads to either from the FDA side, it may lead to a recall. Of course, product liability in the United States, we're a very litigious society, and someone wants their third or fourth summer home. So they're going to, if a problem arises, they'll look to the company. And the other thing, though, related is the reliance on third parties. If we equate it to contract manufacturers to some extent, FDA has made it very clear you can delegate all you want to third parties, but at the end of the day, you're on the hook. So, people may say, well, this is really complicated, and it is, but we're going to use a third party to help us, and that's fine, and I would recommend it. But you can't simply say, well, I've engaged, Minsk Associates if it's my application, because at the end of the day, FDA is going to say, well, it's your application, and if the proverbial S hits the fan, so I'm trying to be not using foul language, part of my language, it would be that at the end of the day, I've considered these issues with again, proper design, labeling, transparency, all of those things. Again, thinking of the what ifs, and you can't just simply rely on the contract manufacturer and delegate your responsibilities. So that's just, I guess, some of the things that kind of come to mind, which relate to oversight and all that. You can put in a contract all you want. Well, the third party is responsible. But from an FDA perspective, that's sweet, and FDA is going to say it's your application. Plaintiff's lawyer is going to say, okay, we'll sue them as well, but you're still the one whose name is on the product, or you're the sponsor of the applicant. So those are some things that come to mind.
Great. All right, let's keep the flow going here. Let's get a little practical. In terms of, okay, so now what? What are some practices and best practices? Flair, maybe from the device side, like what are some effective ways to approach this from the devices themselves?
So maybe not to fit yourself to the last regulation, but to fit yourself to the one that will come tomorrow. Just be prepared. So regarding vulnerability, for instance, assuming always will be vulnerability. So instead of plan, don't focus in the vulnerability and filtering them and prioritize them and patching them in an unknown period of time. Maybe install solution that we will be able to say to you if the library in which the vulnerability found, if it's already loaded in your executable, because if not, you don't need to patch it at all. And if the library is loaded, then maybe the exploit can be prevented, and then you can fix the vulnerability in your own pace whenever you want in the next version that you're supposed to bring. You need to think out of the box, like to have monitoring, to have alerts, to have insights on your device, to think about the normal behavior of your device from usability of the doctor, of the patient, but also from security perspective. And if you have like a normal, and those days you can have like AI who get all the data and present like what is the normal of your devices, your fleet of devices. And then when something suspicious happens, abnormality from security perspective, then you'll be alerted on that. You need to monitor. You need to know better how to react to things that you found in the post market, because you will find things. You just need to plan ahead how to react to them.
Yeah. I think, Daniel, that sort of transitions to the idea of like, how do you make some of the technologies we're talking about enablers? So like how does the cloud assist getting some of these things in place, or in essence put something, so when something changes or needs to be affected, you can be prepared?
Normally people look at the cloud as a security risk, right? But it's actually the opposite way. The cloud can actually be a great enabler to embed the cybersecurity measurements and tools in an active way in order to prevent things from happening. It starts from the basic stuff. Once using the cloud, you can build a centralized security management plan and program and make sure that everything is being managed from a single point in the cloud, and then change policies according to what you are learning and adapt. It continues what I mentioned earlier. It's to run different tools constantly on the cloud, like scanning tools. It can be tools that are coming as part of the cloud vendor toolbox or third-party tools, the best ones in the market, so you can easily integrate them into the CI/CD process and do constant threat analysis and vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, and so on. So you are up to date. And of course, maybe the I think most important point is the ability to use the cloud to update software and firmware. So basically, once you are connected to all the devices all the time, in a secure manner, you can manage, software and firmware updates also from centralized location. And whenever you detect a threat and a vulnerability in a certain level that requires an update, then the cloud can be the one that actually deploys it to all of the devices. So based on your risk assessment and your policies, if it's a major or critical threat, and then you can decide when you do the update, if it's immediately or it's in your next release. And so all of these things are coming also from the cloud side. And there are many others, but definitely the cloud is a big enabler for meeting with the cybersecurity requirements and threats and risks.
Yeah, and I think, not to shift gears, but reality is to do that yourself, there's a lot of moving parts you have to handle and a lot of coordination you need to do. Part of it is look at platforms, we being one, that this is what we live in, right? So the idea is there's lots of dials to turn and you have to be ready to do it. Like Flair said, you need to expect these challenges are going to come up. So Alex, from your point of view, what are some of the best practices complementing what Flair and Daniel said that you recommend to your clients that you see as critical to address all this?
Okay, but one of the most common questions we get from FDA is, asking companies, clients to justify how often they're doing penetration testing and vulnerability scanning. And we've seen a variety of different responses from FDA or comments. But the best one that I've seen is from Matthew Hazlett, who's the FDA policy advisor. And he recommends that companies do their vulnerability scanning at least every 30 days. The post-market cybersecurity guidance requires you, for uncontrolled vulnerabilities, to notify customers within 30 days and provide a fix within 60 days. So that's really the best approach. That said, I have seen reviewers from OHT7 and radiology say every 6 months is fine. In reality, I'm seeing a lot of companies do it on a continuous automated basis almost every single day. That's the reality. They'll run like a Jenkins job and they'll scan your SBOM on GitHub. And that's almost continuous basis. That's just for vulnerability scanning. Now for penetration testing, honestly, I recommend that you do it for every new submission, probably once a year if possible. I understand it's pretty expensive to do that. Takes a lot of resources. So I think every year or every new submission is pretty reasonable for that.
So just keeping our pace going along, because probably we'll want to save a little time to kind of address some of the Q&A. Let's keep on the practical sense. So what about these processes you need to put in place? So one of the things is not only what you plan for, but the things that might kind of trick you up. So Flair, there's lots of things, a lot of noise around false positive alerting, what device security risk management practices have you seen to sort of combat just the variables that are thrown at device manufacturers?
Yeah, so when I need to think out of the box, I'm thinking about something different that act the same as my problem. So let's think about the most important thing for all of us, our home. If we had like an alert system in our home that every time the window stays open or every time a dog or a cat get into our garden was pop up and make a lot of noise, we will change the alarm system, right? And with what we would change it? We will change it with a deterministic alarm system that actually she doesn't care if your door open or if your window open. What she cares about is if a thief gets into the open door, right? So as long as there is no thief, the door can stay open, but there is no problem. If a thief will enter, I want to stop him, prevent him from entering my home, and then to put my alert system on. And then I will be absolutely sure that my alert system is 100% accurate. When I have an alert, she's right. And it won't create a situation that from so many noise out there and so many alerts, I will miss the most important one. So a deterministic solution which prevents the thief from happening. That I think is the best solution.
Great. Hey, Alan, what from sort of like that risk-benefit issues, there's a talk about continuous monitoring, very, very, very comprehensive post-market surveillance. Can you look at it from your lens in terms of things to put into practice?
Yeah, I'm often sort of asked by CEOs or the CFO, is this a shall or a should? Okay. In Hebrew, maybe is it chiyuv? Is it required, or just sort of a nice thing to have? Is it from the Torah, is it the rabbis? So I get those kinds of a lot, which is we want to do the right thing. Let's start there. And I believe that. I think most companies want to do the right thing. But I think that there's the concerns about the technology changes so fast, speed of technology, can we keep up? Some of the things we discussed earlier about how do I do it right, and how do I handle it after the fact? And there's costs involved, and I may even have to hire new personnel and things along those lines. I had this call with an Israeli company, and they were trying to figure out did they need U.S. personnel for certain things and the call was actually from the HR. The legal person brought me in, but it was the HR person asking the in-house counsel. Yeah. So, the idea is everyone wants to do it right because it's the right thing to do. There's safety issues, liability, regulatory reasons, but there's also concerns of can we keep up? How much is this going to cost us? So it comes a little bit of, this benefit risk, analysis that every company has. I would say that in general, I don't want to be overgeneralization, but I think as a general rule, a lot of small startups and companies that are ex-US often struggle with that in particular because it's kind of like, well, if I do all of these things, it's going to delay the process and it's going to cost me a lot of money and it's going to cut into sales, and we're trying to be lean, mean, and green. Whereas larger companies may have the infrastructure to do that. Doesn't mean that smaller companies get a pass. It's just the reality of the company. Of again, is it a shall or a should? And and to some extent, as we've sort of been discussing, a lot of this is fluid and it's broad, and it can be company or product specific. So you want to meet FDA's expectations. FDA has a lot of expectations, and then sometimes, but is that reality? Okay, so there's the should and the shall, and then there's also the FDA sometimes looking at it from a what if, and their what if may be a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a whatever, and the company's just saying, but that's not reality. Okay, and as I tell clients, it's good to be FDA. In my household, I tell the kids it's good to be me. It's better to be my wife. Okay, so in this case, it's FDA has its rules and or expectations, and you're going to have to find this risk benefit balance of, well, I got to play the game. I got to get cleared or authorized, and I have to stay in compliance. But I also am trying to run a business, so I'll often get the tension between commercial CEO, CFO, and then RAQA, and I try to remind them, listen, RAQA is trying to help you from the FDA perspective. I'm trying to help you from the liability perspective, but the CEO says, well, I have shareholders, and I want to do the right thing, but. So it's dealing with that but and trying to figure out, again, what's the company's risk? We're 55 in a 55 mile an hour zone, or are we're 65, or hell, I don't have time for that. I'm 85, and I'll deal with the consequences later because I don't think they're going to happen. So there's just some of the things that I have to deal with, or that
Yeah,
come to.
typical risk analysis, but in some regards, if the risk analysis is wrong, you're in a world of hurt with medical devices.
Right, because it's not a table, it's not a widget. These are medical devices that are going into patients, hospitals, et cetera. So the stakes are higher.
So Daniel, one of the things with this whole is, there are changes in behaviors you need to do, around the way in which you approach post-market. A lot of it comes into like what role does the cloud play or have to play or best play to have this be a proactive stance versus just a mitigation stance?
Yes, so again, one of the advantages that the cloud can be used for when not only addressing the cybersecurity requirements in the pre-submission, but also following with the post-market surveillance requirements and the requirements to continuously monitor the conditions of the device in the field, and definitely the cloud that enables you to be always connected with devices to get their feedback, to be able to collect mass amounts of data and conduct data analytics and trend analysis on the data coming from the device. This is something, again, that can be used in a way that was never before, and address those concerns and requirements coming from the FDA about making sure that the device is working properly. Even before, again, something big happens, you can start, through AI and machine learning, start learning that something is going to be wrong, and the device is starting to operate not in the best way, and basically being able to act upon it before something happens. And also the engagement with patients. So once you're connected to the device, you're basically also connected to the patient, and you can understand, the way that he's using the device, if it's in an effective way, in a safe way, and whether some, again, means of cyber are affecting his normal activity. So these are things that the cloud can be a very powerful tool to be used when it comes to continuous monitoring and post-market surveillance.
Yeah, so it's a tying together clinical operations with device operations to really determine effective way to do it. And if you can really merge those sort of domains, it's helpful. Well, let's do this, because we've had a lot of good questions thrown from the field. I'm also watching the clock. Maybe we do a little bit of a speed round. I'll throw some questions out that I saw, and maybe if you guys can give sort of a concise answer and thought. Alan, one of the things is someone says sort of, hey, I have a device, I know it requires it. What do you recommend as the immediate step?
Well, you look to people like who are on this panel. That'd be one thing, but for certain help, because I think we see that there's a lot of people who can be involved. There's different elements, and so it may not be that one person can handle it all. So you need to make sure you surround yourself with smart people. That's one. The second, maybe there's always the pre-sub option. I mean, you look at the guidance, of course, and the law, and obviously the kinds of things that you've heard on this webinar. But somewhat seriously would be a pre-sub meeting, a pre-submission. If you really have no idea, there's pros and cons of pre-sub meetings. Sometimes you're going to hear more than you expected, or you may get something that becomes more binding than you really thought, even though it's not binding. So if you're not sure, pre-sub is a good way to do it. I would also say, you may want to talk to the review division, whether it's a pre-sub or maybe some sort of informal, channel. If you feel like you're good to go, that is, if you feel like, hey, I've looked at the guidance, I got the right advisors, and I got, submit the damn thing. And then, if they have questions, they'll ask questions. And, Alex talked about that there's certain boilerplate questions that FDA is coming up with, the reviewers are coming up with. If you get access to those kinds of things, that's another way to try to, preempt it. And, that's kind of more on the technical side, but I would also say, pre-sub is probably the first way. You asked to be short, and I went off on a tangent. So sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So hey, here's another question. So Alex, maybe you're in a spot to do this. One of the things is people are wondering, like, what's sort of getting 510Ks rejected? Like, what are some of where are the major insufficiencies relative to documentation? Are there some areas to make sure you don't miss?
Well, when we see like a not substantially equivalent letter, usually, for 510K, they generally have to do with like clinical performance issues, right? So if we get an NSE, it's for some sort of clinical performance issue. But what we're seeing tagged on recently is like minor cybersecurity issues. And for example, like one that I've seen twice lately is you provided us with penetration testing, but you didn't do malformed input, vulnerability scanning, and static code analysis. Now, most companies do their malformed input and that type of testing inside of the penetration test. But if you don't explicitly state that you've done those 4 items, they'll provide you a deficiency. And like I said, I've seen this in 2 NSE letters lately.
Any other high level ones? Or that's probably a good leading.
Yeah, one of the other big things, there was a question on here about CVSS. Generally, what I'm seeing from FDA is they expect you to fix any high or critical vulnerabilities, right?
Yep.
Generally, they seem to be fine with medium and low as long as you've got some appropriate mitigation in place. But you've got to, if they see high or critical in there, they're going to expect you to fix it. The last thing you want to do is run your SBOM the day before your submission is going in.
Well, let's stay on that because there was a question that came up on that. Actually, it came at it from the device side. So, Claire, what's the best way or advice on handling SBOM from a device perspective?
Yeah, so I mentioned it before, like you need some kind of tool for if you find a vulnerability or vulnerabilities in a new library that you're using. So first of all, the library will be in your SBOM, right? But you need to think before starting to investigate whether this library is loaded to your executable or not, because if not, it absolutely means nothing. It's like to leave your window open without a thief getting in. After that, you need to think or install tools that will help you to prevent exploitation of this vulnerability, and then you have the best mitigation ever, because this vulnerability can exist, but no one can exploit it, and hence you can patch it or make a change in your next version and not in an urgent way. And that's why you live with the smallest amount of vulnerability that you need to handle. And I think it saves a lot of time and money and resources.
So let's do this because we're running out of time in the webinar. Thank you very much for everybody that submitted a question. We'll answer them and follow up with them. Thank you very much. But just to put a little bow on this, hopefully this added value. Hopefully this approached it from, once again, a point of view of expertise, but with a perspective of being in your shoes. There are some areas of takeaways that we could follow up and provide the information to it. Hopefully you saw practical as well as strategy related items. And the other thing is we are sort of, for everyone who contributed or attended, there's some follow-ups relative to providing you some information on how to structure an RFI around this topic, but then also BioT potentially scheduling a meeting with one of our experts to do a very initial but strategic gap analysis on what this all means. So one will come up as part of the meeting. The other one, you'll get an email in order to register for it. So, in closing, don't let that stop your questions. If you've got one, please send it. And then what we'll do is across the panel be able to facilitate to the right person to do so. But we do really appreciate everybody jumping on, spending this hour. I'll give it back to the X-Talk folks just to kind of close us up and wrap us up. But thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us improve our webinars. Now, please join us in giving a big thank you to all of our speakers today for that fantastic presentation. We hope you found this webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.